100 doctors can't save the billionaire's baby until the poor black boy did the unthinkable. The Wilson Medical Center had never known failure like this. 100 of the world's most decorated physicians crowded into a facility that cost more than entire hospitals. Their white coats a blur of desperate movement under LED surgical lights. Monitors screamed. Ventilators gasped. A team from Johns Hopkins shouted orders at toxicologists flown in from Geneva, while a Pulitzer Prize-winning pediatric cardiologist pressed trembling fingers to his temples and whispered what no one wanted to hear. We're losing him. Baby Josiah Wilson, heir to a $90 billion pharmaceutical empire, was dying. And $75,000 an hour in medical expertise couldn't tell anyone why. His tiny body had turned a sickly gray-blue. Pale lips, mottled skin, a weak pulse fading like a candle in wind. Every test came back inconclusive. Every treatment failed. And through the rain-streaked window, pressing his bare feet against concrete that had never been swept for someone like him, stood Emmanuel Martin, 12 years old, son of a dead healer, wearing a shirt too thin for October and pants held together with knots and hope. He'd spent his whole life being invisible in this city, the boy who walked the street's edges, who noticed everything because no one ever noticed him. Right now, he was staring at the potted plant beside the incubator, the one that had arrived 4 days ago, the one with pink flowers that smelled faintly sweet, the one that had left a sticky residue on the delivery person's gloves that had brushed the baby's blanket during placement. The one that every genius in that room had walked past 89 times without a second glance. Emmanuel's hands trembled. He knew what it was. His mother, who'd healed a generation of the city's poorest with nothing but plants and prayer, had taught him to recognize that leaf pattern before he could write his name. Oleander. Nerium. The beautiful killer. The doctors were about to perform emergency surgery, looking for answers inside the baby's chest. The answer was sitting in a decorative planter wrapped in silk ribbon. Emmanuel looked at the window, then at the security guard making rounds, then at the memory of his mother's face. The woman who died in a crowded clinic while doctors like these treated the wealthy first. She'd warned him 1,000 times. Stay invisible, Emmanuel. Stay safe. Don't give them a reason to notice you. He thought about what would happen if he was wrong. Then he thought about what would happen if he was right and did nothing. Emmanuel pulled his torn shirt tight, took a breath that burned, and ran. What would you risk to save a life that the world says isn't your business to save? Emmanuel Martin had learned to move without making a sound by the time he was 8 years old. It wasn't a skill anyone had taught him. It was survival. When you lived on the streets in the shadow of billionaire towers, in abandoned buildings where rats outnumbered people 3 to 1, you learned quickly that your existence was tolerated, not welcomed. You learned to move like wind, to breathe like silence, to become so small, so quiet, so utterly forgettable that the wealthy people floating through their pristine lives never had to be inconvenienced by the reminder that you were suffering just beyond their gates. His mother, Abina Martin, had been a traditional healer. She'd learned from her grandmother in West Africa before immigrating to America with dreams stitched from desperation and hope. She tried to practice her craft here, treating neighbors with herbs, delivering babies with prayers, curing fevers with roots that grew in empty lots. But American medicine had no license for wisdom passed down through generations. No certification for knowledge older than textbooks. No insurance codes for miracles made from dirt and faith. So she'd worked off the books, treated people for whatever they could pay, a meal, a blanket, nothing at all. She'd raised Emmanuel alone in a world that punished her for being poor, black, and unwilling to forget where she came from. We are blessed, she would tell him every night, her voice soft with exhaustion and something that might have been faith or might have been delusion. We have breath in our lungs. We have each other. We are blessed, Emmanuel. Don't ever forget that. Emmanuel never argued with her. But he also never forgot the way doctors at the free clinic looked through her when she came in, fevered and weak, coughing blood. He never forgot the 12-hour wait while people with insurance were seen immediately. He never forgot holding her hand as she died from a bacterial infection that $50 worth of antibiotics could have cured, antibiotics she couldn't afford, and they wouldn't give her without payment. He never forgot her last words. Our knowledge is older than their buildings, Emmanuel. Don't let them erase us. Blessed. Sure, if you didn't count the hunger, the cold, the constant terror of being seen by the wrong people at the wrong time. If you're already hooked on Emmanuel's story, you're not going to want to miss what happens next. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single chapter of this journey. The Wilson estate occupied an entire city block in the financial district's most exclusive neighborhood. There were penthouses purchased for their view of sunsets, sculptures commissioned from artists Emmanuel had never heard of, and a private medical wing that had been featured in 5 medical journals. There was a rooftop garden, a helicopter pad, and a security system designed by former CIA operatives. There was a fleet of vehicles that cost more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes, and a wine collection that held bottles older than Emmanuel's grandmother would have been if she'd lived. Emmanuel knew every entrance, not because he was allowed near them. God, no. He knew them because he'd spent months watching from the margins, from across the street behind dumpsters, from the adjacent building's fire escape, from the shadows of the loading dock where delivery trucks blocked security cameras for exactly 90 seconds during drop-offs. He'd mapped the estate in his mind the way other kids mapped their neighborhoods. He knew which guards changed shifts at 3 p.m. He knew which service entrances were monitored and which relied on card access alone. He knew that the head of security, a muscular man named Marcus Crawford, took a 15-minute coffee break in the lobby cafe every afternoon at 4:30. He knew these things because knowing them made him feel like he had some kind of power in a world that constantly reminded him he had none. But lately, Emmanuel had been watching for a different reason. 3 months ago, Victoria Wilson had given birth to a baby boy, Josiah Marcus Wilson, the heir, the crown prince, the future of a dynasty built on patented medications and the kind of pharmaceutical wealth that treated diseases in some countries while ignoring epidemics in others. The baby had arrived in a storm of press releases and society coverage. A newborn photography team had been hired to capture his first moments. A team of specialists rotated in 6-hour shifts. A lactation consultant had been flown in from Denmark to ensure optimal feeding. Emmanuel had watched it all from his usual place, the shadows. And, somewhere along the way, something had shifted in his chest. He'd started timing his routes, so he passed the medical wing's exterior window at dawn when the nurse would hold Josiah near the glass to see the sunrise. He'd started lingering near the service entrance when he knew the baby would be taken for his afternoon wellness checks. He'd started feeling something he couldn't quite name, a strange, aching tenderness for this tiny person who had everything Emmanuel would never have, but who also seemed so small, so fragile, so utterly unaware of the weight of the empire he'd been born to inherit. Maybe it was because Josiah was innocent. Maybe it was because Emmanuel remembered what his mother used to say, "Every child comes into this world pure, baby. What happens after that? That's on us." Or maybe it was because Emmanuel understood in some bone-deep way that he and Josiah were both prisoners of circumstances they hadn't chosen. Josiah would spend his life in a platinum cage, performing for boards and shareholders and a father who saw him as a dynasty rather than a son. Emmanuel would spend his life in the margins, invisible and uncounted, his potential measured only by how well he stayed out of sight. 2 boys. 2 prisons. Same city. This story is about to take a turn you won't see coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you can follow Emmanuel's journey to the very end. Hit that subscribe button now. You won't regret it. It was a Thursday morning when Emmanuel first saw the plant. He was making his usual route past the medical center, taking the alley that ran along the building's east side. The October air was sharp with the smell of rain and exhaust. He was hungry. He was always hungry, and thinking about where he might find food when the loading dock gate opened. A delivery van pulled up, white and expensive-looking, the kind that delivered to places Emmanuel would never enter. The driver unloaded a single item, a large ceramic planter wrapped in cellophane and ribbon, containing a plant with glossy leaves and delicate pink flowers. Emmanuel froze. His blood went cold. His mother's voice echoed in his memory, clear as if she were standing beside him. That one, Emmanuel, the pretty one with the pink stars, that's the beautiful killer. Oleander. Even the smoke from burning, it can stop a heart. Never touch it. Never trust beauty that hides death. He watched the delivery person carry the plant inside. Watched through the window as it was placed on a decorative table beside the incubator where baby Josiah lay sleeping. And Emmanuel knew, with the certainty his mother had taught him, with the knowledge that lived in his bones, that he was watching a timer start counting down. Emmanuel's day began the way every day began, with hunger and calculation. He woke on a flattened cardboard box in the basement of an abandoned textile factory, 3 blocks from the Wilson estate. The other street kids who sheltered there were already gone, scattered to their territories before the police swept through on their morning rounds. Emmanuel moved quickly, folding his cardboard into a tight bundle and hiding it behind a broken boiler. The space was already claimed by an older boy who'd warned him once. Stay invisible or get hurt. He slipped out through a gap in the chain-link fence, keeping his head down, his movements smooth. At 12 years old, he'd perfected the art of not being seen. He walked with his shoulders curved inward, making himself smaller. He avoided eye contact with everyone. He wore clothes so faded and dirt-stained they blended into concrete and shadow. Gray hoodie, brown pants, shoes wrapped in duct tape that made no sound on pavement. The morning routine never changed. Check the dumpsters behind the Italian restaurant on 5th Street. Sometimes they threw out bread that was only 1 day old. Avoid the corner where the police car parked at 7 a.m. Stay clear of the business owners who chased off loiterers with threats and sometimes worse. Move through the city like smoke, like something that might not be real at all. By 8 a.m., he'd found half a bagel and an apple with a soft spot. By 9 a.m., he'd positioned himself near the Wilson Medical Center, watching the morning shift change from across the street. He'd learned the patterns months ago, learned which guards paid attention and which ones checked their phones during walk-throughs. Learned the blind spots in the camera coverage. Learned that the loading dock opened for exactly 4 minutes during supply deliveries. He wasn't planning anything. Not yet. He was just watching, just existing in the margins the way he always had. The way his mother had taught him before everything fell apart. The memory hit him without warning, the way it always did. The free clinic. The plastic chairs bolted to the floor. The fluorescent lights that made everyone look half dead already. His mother's hand in his, burning with fever, her breathing shallow and wet. They'd waited 7 hours while people with insurance cards were called ahead of them. 7 hours while she deteriorated. 7 hours while Emmanuel begged the receptionist, his voice breaking. Please, she's really sick. Please. The receptionist hadn't even looked up from her computer. You'll be called when it's your turn. By the time they saw a doctor, his mother could barely speak. Bacterial pneumonia, they said. Advanced. She needed 4 antibiotics, hospitalization, immediate intervention. But she didn't have insurance. Didn't have the $4,000 deposit they required up front. Didn't have anything except a 12-year-old son and lungs filling with fluid. They gave her a prescription she couldn't afford to fill and sent her back into the night. She died 3 days later in that textile factory basement, holding Emmanuel's hand and whispering about plants and healing and knowledge that couldn't be erased. He'd held her until she stopped breathing. Then he covered her with his jacket and walked away, because calling authorities meant questions he couldn't answer, a system that would swallow him whole. After that, Emmanuel Martin became a ghost. He learned to scavenge without being noticed, learned to sleep in places no one checked, learned to survive by being nothing, no one, nowhere, until the day he saw the plant. Until the day a dying baby made him remember what his mother had said about children and innocence and the responsibility of those who know better. Until the day being invisible stopped being enough. Charles Wilson built his fortune on the promise of healing. Not the kind Emmanuel's mother practiced, dirt under fingernails, prayers whispered over boiling roots, but the sterile, patented, profitable kind. Wilson Pharmaceuticals held exclusive rights to 17 life-saving medications. Diabetes drugs that cost $800 a month to produce and sold for $8,000. Cancer treatments that could extend life by 6 months if you could afford the $200,000 price tag. Antibiotics that sat in warehouses while people in poor countries died from infections that cost pennies to cure. Charles didn't see the contradiction. He saw innovation, progress, the free market rewarding excellence. He'd built the medical wing 5 years ago, transforming the east side of his estate into something that looked like it belonged in a science fiction film. Surgical suites with robotic arms. Imaging equipment that could detect abnormalities at the cellular level. A team of specialists on retainer, the best minds in pediatric medicine, cardiology, neurology, genetics. They cost him $15 million a year in salaries alone. Money well spent, he told himself. When you're worth $90 billion, you don't take chances with family. His wife, Victoria, had wanted 3 things in life: wealth, status, and an heir. She'd achieved the first 2 by marrying Charles at 26. The third had taken longer. 5 years of fertility treatments, 3 miscarriages, and finally, at 34, a successful pregnancy carried to term. Josiah Marcus Wilson arrived on a Tuesday in July, delivered by a team of 4 physicians in the estate's private birthing suite. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Perfect APGAR scores. Charles had held his son for exactly 3 minutes before handing him to the night nurse and returning to a conference call with shareholders. Victoria had posted a single photograph to social media, professional, filtered, captioned with gratitude to God and medical science, before retreating to her recovery suite where she wouldn't be disturbed. The baby was raised by rotations. Nurse Stevens handled nights, monitoring his breathing, his temperature, his feeding schedule down to the milliliter. Nurse Chun took mornings, conducting developmental assessments, tracking his weight, his reflexes, his response to stimuli. Dr. Rahimi, the pediatric specialist, visited twice weekly to review charts and update protocols. Josiah slept in a nursery designed by a child psychologist. Soft colors proven to promote neural development, temperature controlled to 0.1 degrees, air purified through medical-grade filters. His diapers were organic. His formula was custom blended. His future was mapped out before he could lift his head. The right preschool, the right tutors, the right university, the right marriage, the right legacy. Everything was perfect. Everything was controlled. Everything was purchased. And then, on a Thursday morning, someone sent a gift. A beautiful potted plant with glossy leaves and delicate pink flowers, delivered with a note, for the little prince. May he grow strong and beautiful. The plant was placed on a decorative table beside the incubator, where sunlight would make it thrive, where its beauty would brighten the sterile room, where its leaves would shed invisible toxins into the air a 3-month-old baby breathed. Nobody checked. Nobody questioned. Nobody recognized the beautiful killer that had just been welcomed into the empire of healing. Nobody except a barefoot boy watching from across the street, whose mother had taught him that the deadliest poisons often wore the prettiest faces. The christening was scheduled for Sunday. 200 guests. A cathedral Emmanuel had never been inside. A reception that cost more than most people's homes. Victoria Wilson had planned every detail for 6 months. The imported roses, the live orchestra, the champagne that was older than Emmanuel's mother had been when she died. Saturday morning, the gifts began arriving. They came in luxury vehicles with white glove drivers. Crystal from Tiffany. Stocks and bonds. A trust fund established by a business partner. A painting commissioned from an artist whose name Emmanuel wouldn't have recognized even if someone had told him. Emmanuel watched from his usual spot across the street, hidden behind a food truck that parked there on weekends. He'd learned to position himself where he could see the loading dock without being seen, where he could exist in that space between visibility and erasure. The plan arrived at 11:47 a.m. Emmanuel would remember the exact time because the church bells from St. Mary's were ringing noon when he saw it. A white delivery van, unmarked, expensive-looking. The driver wore gloves, thin latex gloves that covered his hands completely. He unloaded a single item, a large ceramic planter, white with gold trim, wrapped in cellophane that caught the sunlight like diamonds. Inside, a plant with glossy dark green leaves and clusters of delicate pink flowers, each bloom shaped like a small trumpet. Emmanuel's blood turned to ice water. He knew those flowers. Knew them the way other kids knew cartoon characters or video game levels. His mother had shown him a picture in one of her old plant books, the pages yellow and brittle, held together with tape and devotion. She'd made him memorize the leaf pattern, the flower shape, the milky sap that oozed from broken stems. Oleander, she'd said, her finger tracing the illustration. Nerium oleander. In some places, they call it rose laurel. In others, the beautiful killer. Every part of it is poison, Emmanuel. The leaves, the flowers, the stems, even the smoke if you burn it. A single leaf can stop a grown man's heart. A baby, she'd shaken her head. A baby wouldn't stand a chance. Why would anyone grow it? Emmanuel had asked. He must have been 8 years old, still young enough to believe the world made sense. His mother had smiled, sad and knowing. Because it's beautiful, baby. Because people trust beautiful things. Because poison dressed in pretty colors is still poison, but nobody wants to believe it. Now Emmanuel watched that poison being carried into the Wilson Medical Center. Watched through the ground floor window as it was placed on a decorative table. Watched as the delivery person adjusted its position, moving it closer to the incubator where baby Josiah lay sleeping. Watched as the cellophane was removed and the flowers were left to breathe their toxic beauty into the filtered air. He should walk away, should mind his business, should remember that this wasn't his world, wasn't his problem, wasn't his concern. But he thought about his mother's words. Every child comes into this world pure, baby. And he stayed, watching, waiting, knowing that something terrible was about to begin. It started 36 hours after the plan arrived. Emmanuel was across the street, in his usual watching spot, when the first ambulance screamed up to the medical center's private entrance. Then another. Then a helicopter landed on the rooftop pad, rotors still spinning as doctors in suits rushed inside. Something was wrong. Emmanuel pressed closer to the building, using the chaos as cover. Through the ground floor window, he could see into the nursery now. Nurse Chun was standing over the incubator, her hand pressed to her mouth. Dr. Rahimi was barking orders into a phone. Charles Wilson stood frozen in the doorway, his face the color of concrete. Baby Josiah was seizing, his tiny body rigid, back arched, arms jerking in movements that looked wrong, inhuman. The monitors screamed red warnings. Numbers dropping, heart rate irregular. By evening, the medical center had transformed into something from a nightmare. Emmanuel counted 12 doctors in the first hour, 20 by midnight. By Sunday morning, there were so many specialists crowding into that room, they had to take turns examining the baby. Cardiologists from Johns Hopkins, toxicologists from Geneva, pediatric neurologists from Stanford, a team from the CDC in hazmat suits, running tests for bioweapons and rare pathogens. A geneticist who'd won awards for identifying orphan diseases. They brought equipment in cases that looked like something from spy movies. They ran blood tests, spinal taps, genetic sequencing, viral panels, bacterial cultures, toxicology screens that checked for everything from heavy metals to snake venom. Nothing. Every test came back inconclusive or normal. Every treatment failed. Emmanuel watched Josiah deteriorate in real time. The baby's skin turned a sickly, grayish blue. His lips went pale. His breathing became shallow and labored despite the ventilator. The cardiac monitors showed arrhythmias that shouldn't exist in an infant. Irregular beats, dangerous pauses, a heart struggling to remember its rhythm. The symptoms were textbook. Emmanuel had memorized them from his mother's teachings. Nausea and vomiting. Check, the nurses kept suctioning fluid. Cardiac arrhythmias, check, the monitors showed it. Excessive salivation, check, Josiah was drooling more than normal. Weakness and lethargy, check, the baby barely moved anymore. Dilated pupils, check, Dr. Rahimi had commented on it twice. Oleander poisoning. Digitalis toxicity. The plant was killing Josiah one breath at a time, shedding its invisible poison into the air he inhaled, into the surfaces his caregivers touched, and then touched him with. And the plant sat there, right there, 18 inches from the incubator. Its pink flowers bright and cheerful. Its leaves glossy with health. Beautiful and deadly and completely ignored. Emmanuel watched the doctor walk past it for the fourth time, saw him place his hand on the pot's rim to steady himself as he leaned over to check in 4-line. Saw him then touch Josiah's forehead with that same hand. He couldn't stay silent anymore. Couldn't stay invisible. Not when he knew. Not when he could help. Emmanuel made his way to the service entrance and knocked. A security guard opened the door, looked down at him with instant suspicion. "I need to talk to the doctors," Emmanuel said, his voice shaking. "I know what's wrong with the baby." The guard laughed. Actually laughed. "Kid, there are 100 doctors in there. You think they need help from?" He looked Emmanuel up and down, taking in the torn clothes, the dirt-stained skin, the desperation. "Get lost before I call the cops." The door slammed in Emmanuel's face. Inside, baby Josiah kept dying. Emmanuel walked away from the medical center with his fists clenched so tight his fingernails drew blood from his palms. The guard's laughter echoed in his head. The door slamming in his face replayed on loop. He made it 2 blocks before he had to stop, press his back against a brick wall, and fight the urge to scream. A baby was dying. He knew why. He knew how to help. And nobody would listen because of what he was wearing. Because of where he slept. Because of the color of his skin and the dirt under his fingernails and the fact that his knowledge didn't come with a medical degree. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the cold sidewalk, his head in his hands. This was why his mother had told him to stay invisible. This was why she'd warned him that the world wouldn't see his value, only his poverty. This was why she'd died whispering that their knowledge would be erased. But she'd also said something else. Something Emmanuel had almost forgotten in the years of surviving, of disappearing, of making himself small enough to avoid being crushed. It was 3 weeks before she died. They'd been sheltering in an abandoned community center, rain hammering the broken windows. A woman had come to them in the night, carrying a child who'd eaten something poisonous, berries from a plant she couldn't name. His mother had worked for hours, making a paste from charcoal and clay, forcing it into the boy's mouth while he convulsed and vomited. The woman had nothing to pay with. No money, no food, nothing. Emmanuel had asked his mother later why she'd helped. Why she'd used their precious supplies for a stranger who couldn't repay them. His mother had looked at him with eyes that held more wisdom than any textbook. "This knowledge I carry, Emmanuel, it didn't start with me. It came from my grandmother, who learned it from her grandmother, who learned it from women whose names we'll never know. Women who survived slavery by remembering plants. Women who healed their communities when doctors wouldn't come to black neighborhoods. Women who passed down remedies in whispers and songs because writing them down wasn't safe." She'd taken his hand, pressed it to his chest. "This knowledge lives here now, in you. And knowledge that can save lives isn't meant to be hidden, baby. It's meant to be used. That's the inheritance I'm giving you. Not money, not property, but something older and more valuable. The ability to heal. The responsibility to try. Even when people don't want it." Emmanuel had asked, especially then. His mother had smiled, tired but certain. Because a child's life is worth more than pride. Worth more than comfort. Worth more than staying safe. You remember that, Emmanuel. When the time comes, and it will come, you remember that healing is resistance. Helping is rebellion. And sometimes doing the right thing means doing the unthinkable. Now, sitting on a sidewalk 2 blocks from a dying baby, Emmanuel understood what she'd meant. He stood up, wiped his eyes, started walking back toward the medical center. His mind was already working, calculating blind spots and shift changes in the 4 minutes when the loading dock stayed open. He didn't have a medical degree, didn't have money or status or access, but he had his mother's knowledge, had her courage, had her inheritance living in his bones. And sometimes that was enough. It had to be enough. Because baby Josiah was running out of time, and Emmanuel Martin was done being invisible. Emmanuel returned to the medical center as the sun set on Sunday evening. The christening had been canceled. The cathedral sat empty. Instead, the building blazed with lights, every window glowing like a desperate prayer against the darkening sky. He found his position behind a dumpster that gave him a clear view through the ground floor window. What he saw made his stomach clench with fear. Baby Josiah was barely moving. The ventilator was doing all the breathing now. His skin had taken on a grayish tint that Emmanuel recognized from his mother's warnings. The color of a body giving up, shutting down, conserving what little life remained for the vital organs that were also failing. The doctors had multiplied. Emmanuel counted faces, 30, 40, 50. They crowded the nursery in layers, some examining the baby, others studying monitors, still others arguing in tight clusters. He could see their mouths moving, see the frustration in their gestures, the exhaustion in their faces. A woman in a white coat, Dr. Rahimi, was speaking intensely to Charles Wilson. Emmanuel couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language. Bad news. Worse news. The kind of news that made a billionaire's face crumble. Victoria Wilson sat in a chair in the corner, perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, like she was posing for a portrait. Even in crisis, she maintained composure. Even watching her son die, she refused to be anything less than elegant. Emmanuel's eyes moved to the plant. Still there. Still beautiful. Still killing. A nurse walked past it, her sleeve brushing the leaves. She then adjusted Josiah's blanket. Cross-contamination. Poison transfer. Emmanuel wanted to scream. He tried a different entrance. The main lobby. A receptionist looked at him like he was something that had crawled out of the sewer. This is a private facility. You need to leave. Please, I just need 1 minute with the doctors. Security, she called, not even letting him finish. Marcus Crawford appeared within seconds. The head of security was a wall of muscle and authority, his hand already on Emmanuel's shoulder, already pushing him toward the door. You. Again. I thought I told you. The plant, Emmanuel said desperately. The pink flowers by the baby's bed. It's oleander. It's poisoning him. Please, you have to listen. Crawford's grip tightened. A street kid doesn't tell doctors anything. You understand me? There are 100 physicians in there, actual doctors with actual education, and you think you know better? My mother was a healer. Your mother was probably a junkie, and you're probably high right now. Crawford dragged him toward the exit. I see you near this building again. I'm calling the police. Actually, no. I'm handling it myself. You'll disappear, kid. Permanently. Nobody's gonna miss another homeless black boy. The threat was clear. The violence in Crawford's eyes was real. Emmanuel had seen that look before. The look of someone who considered him less than human, easily disposable, already forgotten. Crawford threw him onto the sidewalk. Emmanuel's hands scraped against concrete, drawing blood. The security door slammed shut with finality. Inside, through the window, Emmanuel watched the monitors around Josiah's incubator start flashing red. Watched doctors rush in with crash carts. Watched a baby's life slip away while the answer sat 18 inches from his bed, ignored and beautiful and deadly. Emmanuel stood up slowly, wiped the blood from his palms onto his pants, looked at the building, at the guards, at the cameras, at every obstacle between him and the truth. Then he started planning, because asking permission hadn't worked, because being polite hadn't worked, because the system that had killed his mother was about to kill another child. Sometimes doing the right thing meant doing the unthinkable. His mother had promised him that. Now he was going to prove it. Emmanuel spent the night preparing. He gathered what he needed from places nobody watched. Activated charcoal from a water filter he found in a dumpster, clay from the riverbank, roots from the overgrown lot behind the medical center. He ground them together using a rock and a piece of broken tile, the way his mother had taught him. The paste was dark and thick, smelling of earth and old knowledge. By morning, he had a plan. He'd watched the security patterns for months. Knew that at 6:47 a.m., during shift change, there was a 4-minute window when the loading dock was unmanned and the cameras reset. 4 minutes. That's all he had. He waited across the street, his heart hammering, the paste wrapped in a cloth and tucked into his pocket. At 6:45, he moved, crossed the street, slipped into the shadow of the loading dock. 6:47. The guard walked away for his shift change. Emmanuel counted to 10, then moved. Through the door, down the corridor, left at the supply room. right toward the nursery wing. Alarms would sound soon. He had maybe 2 minutes before Crawford and his team descended. 2 minutes to do the impossible. The nursery door was closed but not locked. Emmanuel pushed it open, stepped inside, and froze. 100 pairs of eyes turned to stare at him. Doctors in white coats, nurses in scrubs, Charles Wilson in a suit that cost more than Emmanuel would earn in his lifetime. All of them frozen in shock at the sight of a poor black boy in torn clothes standing in their sterile sanctuary. Dr. Rahimi spoke first, her voice sharp with outrage. "How did you get in here?" "Security." Emmanuel's eyes went to the incubator, to Josiah, barely breathing, his tiny chest rising and falling with mechanical assistance, to the monitors showing a heart rate that was too slow, too irregular, too close to stopping. "The plant," Emmanuel said, his voice shaking but loud. "The oleander. It's poisoning him." Silence. Then laughter. Actual laughter from 3 doctors near the back. "Oleander," a man with a British accent stepped forward, his eyes cold with contempt. "Child, we've run every toxicology panel known to medical science. That plant is decorative. Harmless." "It's not harmless," Emmanuel insisted. "Every part of it is toxic. The leaves shed particles. The flowers release compounds. It causes cardiac glycoside poisoning, arrhythmias, vomiting, weakness. Everything he's showing. And you learned this where?" Charles Wilson's voice was ice. "Medical school? Or for whatever con artist taught you to scam desperate families?" Emmanuel pulled the paste from his pocket. "My mother taught me. She was a healer. This is activated charcoal. It binds to the toxins, neutralizes them. If we give it to him now..." "Absolutely not." Dr. Rahimi moved between Emmanuel and the incubator. "That substance is unsterile, unregulated, and potentially lethal. You will not touch this child." Behind them, the door burst open. Crawford and 2 guards rushed in, grabbing Emmanuel by the arms. The paste fell from his hands, hitting the floor. "No." Emmanuel struggled. "Please, you have to listen. He's dying and you're letting him die because you won't see what's right in front of you." Crawford lifted him off the ground. "Time to go, kid." Emmanuel looked at Josiah, at the baby who would die because the world valued credentials over truth, because poverty made knowledge invisible, because a 12-year-old black boy couldn't possibly know something that 100 doctors didn't. And Emmanuel did the unthinkable. He twisted in Crawford's grip, used the man's momentum against him, and broke free. 3 steps. That's all he needed. 3 steps to the incubator. He grabbed Josiah, so small, so light, so close to death, and ran. Not toward the door, toward the supply room in the corner. Slammed the door. Locked it. Outside, chaos erupted. Alarms screamed. Fists pounded on the door. Crawford's voice. "Open this door, or I will break it down and kill you myself." Emmanuel held Josiah against his chest, reached for the paste he'd hidden in his other pocket, and whispered the words his mother had whispered to dying children. "I've got you. You're going to be okay." Then he pressed the dark paste to the baby's lips and prayed that his mother's knowledge was stronger than their doubt. The supply room was small. Metal shelves lined with bandages, surgical gloves, sterile wraps. A sink in the corner. 1 small window, too high to reach. And Emmanuel, holding a dying baby, with death on one side of the door and doubt on the other. Josiah was barely breathing. His lips were pale blue. His skin felt cold and clammy against Emmanuel's chest. The baby's heartbeat was weak, irregular, a failing drum that could stop at any moment. Emmanuel's hands shook as he applied the paste to Josiah's lips. Dark and thick, it looked like mud, like something that belonged in the earth, not in the mouth of a billionaire's heir. He used his finger to gently push a small amount onto the baby's tongue, then rubbed it into his gums. "Please," Emmanuel whispered. "Please work. Please." Outside, the pounding intensified. Crawford's voice. "You have 10 seconds before I break this door down." 10, 9, 8. Emmanuel cradled Josiah closer, trying to keep him warm, trying to transfer life through sheer will. He remembered his mother's words. The charcoal binds to the toxins, pulls them from the blood. Give it time, baby. Give it time. But time was the one thing he didn't have. 7, 6, 5. The doctors were shouting now. Charles Wilson screaming about killing Emmanuel himself. Victoria Wilson's voice, sharp with hysteria, demanding her baby back. Dr. Rahimi calling for the police. A symphony of fury and fear and certainty that Emmanuel was murdering their child. Maybe they were right. Maybe his mother's knowledge was just superstition. Maybe he just killed a baby with dirt and desperation. Maybe this was how his story ended. Arrested, imprisoned, or dead in a supply room, remembered as the street kid who thought he knew better than science. 4, 3, 2. Emmanuel closed his eyes, held Josiah tighter, felt the baby's weak heartbeat against his own chest, felt his mother's presence in the room, her hands on his shoulders, her voice in his ear. You did right, baby. You did what they wouldn't. That's healing. That's resistance. That's love. 1. The door exploded inward. Crawford came through like thunder, 2 guards behind him. Doctors poured in after them. Emmanuel looked up, expecting violence, expecting the end. But then Josiah coughed. A small sound. Weak, but real. Coughed again, and this time dark fluid came up. The paste mixed with toxins, the poison being expelled from his tiny body. The baby's chest expanded, taking a breath without mechanical help. Then another. Deeper this time. Real breathing. Living breathing. The monitors someone had wheeled to the door started changing. The heart rate steadied, climbing from 60 beats per minute to 70, to 80, finding its natural rhythm like a song, remembering its melody. Josiah's lips pinked. His skin warmed. His eyes opened, confused, crying but alive. So impossibly alive. Crawford froze mid-step. The doctors fell silent. Charles Wilson stopped breathing. Dr. Rahimi pushed forward, stethoscope already to Josiah's chest. She listened, moved it, listened again. Her face transformed from fury to confusion to something that might have been awe. His heart, she whispered. It's normalizing. The arrhythmia is resolving. Another doctor checked his oxygen levels. Blood oxygen rising. He's breathing independently. Pulse is strengthening. Pupil response improving. The medical team descended on Josiah, checking vitals, drawing blood, running scans. Emmanuel stood in the corner, forgotten now, invisible again. But this time, his invisibility felt different. Not like erasure. Like vindication. Charles Wilson stared at Emmanuel. Not with gratitude. With something more complicated. Fear, maybe. Or shame. The look of a man whose $90 billion couldn't buy what a poor boy had given for free. Emmanuel met his gaze and didn't look away. For the first time in his life, he didn't make himself small. Didn't apologize for existing. Didn't disappear. He'd save a life with his mother's knowledge. With black gold. The charcoal and clay and wisdom that survived slavery, poverty, and medical erasure. And nobody could take that away. They arrested Emmanuel anyway. 2 police officers arrived within 15 minutes, handcuffed a 12-year-old boy, and pushed him into the back of a patrol car, while doctors continued examining the baby he'd saved. Crawford insisted on charges. Breaking and entering. Kidnapping. Assault. Practicing medicine without a license. Emmanuel sat in the holding cell for 6 hours before Charles Wilson's lawyers arrived and made it all disappear. No charges. No record. Just a polite suggestion that Emmanuel refrain from trespassing in the future. When they released him, Charles Wilson was waiting outside the station. His car, a Mercedes that cost more than most houses, idled at the curb. Get in, Charles said. Not an invitation. A command. Emmanuel considered walking away. But something in the man's face made him stay. Not gratitude. Something harder to name. Something like reckoning. The car smelled like leather and money. Emmanuel left dirty marks on the seat. Charles noticed but said nothing. The doctors confirmed it. Charles said finally. Oleander poisoning. They removed the plant and tested Josiah's blood. Cardiac glycosides. Everything you said was correct. He paused. 100 doctors missed it. You saw it immediately. Emmanuel stayed silent. I want to offer you something, Charles continued. Education. The best schools. Medical training. A place in my home, if you want it. Full scholarship to any university. A future. You saved my son's life. I'm prepared to change yours. It was everything. Everything Emmanuel had never had. Food, shelter, education, safety. A chance to escape the streets, the cold, the daily calculation of survival. A chance to become someone the world would see. No, Emmanuel said quietly. Charles blinked. No, I'll take the education, Emmanuel clarified. Medical school, if you're offering. But I'm not leaving my community. I'm not moving into your mansion and pretending I'm something I'm not. He looked directly at Charles Wilson. My mother died because she didn't have insurance. Because a free clinic made her wait 7 hours while people with money got seen immediately. Because the system you profit from decided her life was worth less than theirs. Charles's face hardened. That's not fair. Josiah almost died surrounded by 100 doctors because none of them learned to value knowledge that doesn't come with a degree. Because traditional medicine, the kind that kept my ancestors alive, is dismissed as superstition. Emmanuel's voice was steady now, certain. I'll learn your science. I'll learn your degrees. But I'm not abandoning the wisdom that saved your son. I'm not erasing my mother to make you comfortable. Silence filled the car. Charles stared at this impossible child who'd saved his heir and then refused to be grateful for scraps. What do you want? Charles asked finally. A clinic, Emmanuel said. Free. In my neighborhood. Where traditional medicine and modern medicine work together. Where people don't die waiting for insurance approval. Where a healer's daughter doesn't have to choose between buying food and buying antibiotics. He met Charles's eyes. You built an empire on healing. Build something that actually heals everyone. Charles was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly he nodded. I'll fund it. But you're running it. Once you're trained. Once you're ready. Emmanuel climbed out of the car. Stood on the sidewalk in his torn clothes and duct-taped shoes. Looking at a billionaire through an open window. One more thing, Emmanuel said. The plant. Donate it to a medical school. Let them study it. Let them learn that poison can look beautiful and wisdom can look poor, and saving lives sometimes means listening to the voices you've been trained to ignore. He walked away then, didn't wait for Charles's response. Walked back toward the textile factory basement, toward the community that had kept him alive, toward a future he would build from the rubble of the past. His mother's words echoed in his heart. Knowledge that can save lives isn't meant to be hidden, baby. It's meant to be used. Emmanuel Martin had used it, and in doing so, he'd proven that healing wasn't about wealth or status or credentials. It was about seeing what others missed, about valuing what others dismissed, about carrying forward the wisdom of those the world tried to erase. Josiah Wilson would grow up strong because a poor black boy refused to stay invisible, and Emmanuel Martin would spend his life making sure no other child, rich or poor, would die from ignorance disguised as expertise. That was his inheritance. That was his promise. That was the price of wisdom and its power.